Today, we're going to be speaking with Dr. Rick Bright, who's an immunologist and virologist who spent 10 years in the influenza division at the CDC, another 10 years leading pandemic prevention efforts at BARDA. He now leads his own organization, Bright Global Health. So listen, I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. I think that there are many in my audience and much of the country that is not emotionally ready at this point to talk about the potential of another pandemic. But I want to do my due diligence and talk to you a little bit about H5N1, known also as bird flu. So let's just start with, what's going on? How concerned are you right now about what we're seeing?
Well, David, thanks for having me on today. And it is a timely topic, and I can understand the pandemic fatigue that most of the country, most of the world is feeling right now. So it's important to know that there are a number of people that have their eye on this, and hopefully we're going to do the right thing this time and make it less impactful than we saw the COVID virus when it swept through the world. H5N1 is a flu virus. So most of us are familiar with flu viruses. This is a particular flu virus that usually stays in bird population, wild birds like ducks and geese. However, when a bird virus jumps from birds to people, we've seen that it could be very devastating. Actually, it can make people really sick and it can kill people. And historically, about half of the people that have been confirmed to be infected with H5N1 have died. So you can see why we're concerned about this, especially as it starts now circulating in animals, mammals that are really closely interfacing with people.
So there is some amount of this that seems to be endemic, as you say, to wild birds, but we're seeing a couple of things now that are concerning. Part of it is the level at which we're seeing it in birds, but also we're also seeing it in mammals at a much greater degree than we were. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that. And there have already been a few human cases recently. Is that all true?
That is all true. I mean, actually, the first time we saw this virus jump from birds to people was in Hong Kong in 1997. It was a pretty rare incident. About 18 people got infected that we know about. We don't know how many people were exposed actually at that time. Through the time since then, a number of different things have been happening. The virus has been moving from the wild bird population into domestic poultry populations. So you've seen over the last several years the news about chicken flocks being infected with this virus. And what we do in those cases is we annihilate those chickens. We kill the flocks, we completely decontaminate the farm and try to get rid of the virus from the chickens, from the food supply, and from the environment. What is starting to happen more and more over the last several years is we're finding this virus in more mammals. Now, again, most of those have been wild mammals, bobcats, skunk, raccoons, bears, polar bears, a variety of these animals that we don't normally have a lot of human animal interaction with. So it was really concerning this year, just the last couple of months, where we noted that dairy cows are infected with this virus and we're getting sick. And that is concerning because of the huge interface that we have between farmers and dairy workers and animals, people working in the slaughterhouses and in the milk processing facilities. So we have a lot of interaction with these cows, and these are domestic mammals. And when we just thought it was in one farm or in one cow, it was concerning, but we very quickly learned that this virus has spread through the dairy cattle population across the United States. So now we have hundreds, if not thousands, of people interacting with these infected dairy cows on a daily basis. And the environment we know is contaminated. So there's a lot of this virus in the milk that's being transported to milk processing facilities. And there's a lot of this virus in the milk that's being disposed of in the wastewater system and in lakes and ponds, et cetera, around the farm. And because of this, we're finding now a lot of cats, domestic cats on those farms are drinking this milk or in this contaminated
Mm.
environment, and they're getting infected with this virus. And then sadly, when we're finding the cats that are infected, it very likely leads to death in those cats. So we're learning a lot about this, but this is really concerning because of that increased interface between domestic mammals now and people.
In terms of the people that have caught this, Has there been any human to human transmission so far, or has it been all from contact with infected animals?
Well, it's really hard to really define that clearly, other than we do believe historically, since 1997 onward, most of the humans that have been confirmed to be infected with this virus had direct contact with an animal, with an infected animal. They picked up a sick bird, they disposed of it, or something along those lines. We haven't, and we've done a lot of investigation to try to find a link between the family members, for example, in the past. We haven't found a clear link to indicate human to human transmission. In the recent cases in the United States, it's been a direct interface between a person and the infected animal. So no clear signs yet of human to human interaction or transmission.
Is that, I mean, it seems like that would be a good sign with regard to the possibility of this starting to spread between humans, at least initially. Is that fair?
It would be an alarming sign. The great thing is the virus has a fingerprint, has genetic code. So the genes of this virus make it something that we can trace, like a breadcrumb trail back to where it came from and where it's going. And what's unique about the influenza viruses in this genetic makeup, the genes code very specifically to infect birds. And we know those mutations that must occur in those genes for that virus to be able to infect humans better and then transmit human to human. And those likely won't happen all at once. So if we start to see that virus, as is in more mammals, adapting to mammals through that genetic code transition, then we'll be able to track that virus as it evolves and be ready for it if it were to start spreading more efficiently person to person.
Now, we're getting a little bit into speculation here, but you talked earlier about the mortality rate among those humans confirmed to have had bird flu. We don't know necessarily how likely one is to get bird flu if they are exposed. That would be a different question, which it sounded like you said we don't necessarily know the answer to. Is it fair to expect that if it became more suited to human transmission, it would likely also change and we would see a lower mortality rate? Or is it not fair to make that assumption?
I think it's fair to make that assumption. I do want to caveat that influenza viruses are, surprisingly, uh, I would say, we're constantly surprised with influenza viruses. So we should learn to expect the unexpected. So
Mm.
just when we think we know an influenza virus, it changes and we learn something new about it. We didn't know it can infect cow udders, for example, mammalian tissue in cows. But we do think that the virus would not go very far and spread very far if it did kill 50% or more of the people that it infected. So most likely to be an efficient virus to spread efficiently among people, it's going to reduce that mortality rate. However, 50% is very high, and SARS-CoV-2 was 1 to 2%. So we have a lot of space in there, so a virus could still be much more lethal than what we saw with the COVID virus over the last 4 years.
In terms of, if you Google this, you can find all sorts of different assertions made with regard to transmission and food supply. A couple things that I think would be relevant to know. If you buy normal pasteurized milk that's been heated to a certain temperature, do you have to worry about getting this from milk that you're drinking?
Right now, I would say no. The FDA has done a lot of testing on pasteurized milk from the grocery stores, and their tests have shown that there are virus fragments in that milk, but they did not survive the pasteurization process. And the milk is not, they cannot isolate active live virus from that milk. And so I want to also make sure we think about this as a point in time, a snapshot.
Yep.
There are a few farms that have these infected cows. Now, in our dairy production process in the United States, we tend to mix and blend milk from a number of different farms. And so right now, we just have a few farms with infected cows that are contributing to that mix of milk going through pasteurization. Pasteurization seems to be handling that quite well.
Right.
As this virus spreads to more and more cows on more and more farms, that ratio of infected milk to uninfected milk going into the tanks into that pasteurization process is going to rise. So we want to make sure that we're continually testing that pasteurization process as it is pressured with higher levels of virus to make sure it completely inactivates virus in that milk. Ideally, David, we would be doing more things to keep the virus on the farm. And so there's a number of things we should be doing to prevent higher loads of virus going into the pasteurization process. But right now, our best check and the best safety measure between that virus and us is that pasteurization process in milk.
Does raw milk represent a risk then?
Raw milk is extremely risky at this point. Although we don't have any confirmed infections of people who are from people drinking raw milk at this point, we do suspect that the cats and the raccoons and the skunks in the area are probably drinking raw milk that's infected with H5N1 virus, and that is how they're getting infected, and it is lethal in those animals. So we are concerned if people consume these high amounts of virus in the raw milk, then they are putting themselves at extreme risk for infection, severe illness, and maybe even death. We don't know at this point, but it is too risky. And please, anyone listening, do not drink raw milk at this time.
When it comes to eggs, if you scramble an egg and it is all cooked to, I don't remember if it's 165 or what temperature it would be at which we would consider the eggs fully cooked. I'm sure you can tell us. Is there a risk with a fully cooked scrambled egg? What about a soft boiled egg or sunny side up egg where the yolk is not totally cooked?
You know, it's interesting for the eggs in the poultry process and the egg producing farming. You know, if we know infected birds, those again, those population birds are culled and killed. And there's a very good process in making sure that infected flocks are not laying eggs going to the market. A second backup is most of those eggs going to market also go through a pasteurization or treatment process that has been shown repeatedly to kill any levels of virus or bacteria in those eggs. That third layer of protection, as you described, is the heat process, the cooking process. Again, if you eat raw eggs, you're always assuming a higher level of risk for any type of bacteria or things that might be in that egg still, or even in the process or transport of those eggs from market to your house to the kitchen. So I'm pretty comfortable in saying if you cook those eggs, then you're pretty safe because of the multi-layered process of protection that they've gone through.
All right. Now, in terms of treatment and vaccine, and in general, we know that influenza, it seems as though when we look at the annual flu vaccine, sometimes it's well matched to what's out there and sometimes it's not, and you can get different levels of effectiveness with the annual flu vaccine. What do we have as far as H5N1 vaccine? What do we have as far as treatment, antiviral, et cetera?
Well, the good thing is we've been investing in vaccines and antivirals and diagnostics for H5N1 for almost 20 years, greater than 20 years. So I tell people we're better prepared for an influenza outbreak than probably any other pathogen outbreak that we've ever seen to date. But that said, we also know so much about H5N1 viruses that make us still vulnerable to what we might learn about this particular virus when it adapts to people and starts spreading. Our vaccines for influenza largely are produced in eggs. And so if we were to have a bird flu virus that's wiping out chicken populations, we might wipe out our supply chain of eggs to make
Ah,
those vaccines. H5N1 doesn't grow very well. Generally, the vaccine virus needs to grow in eggs for a while, and then they crack open the egg and collect the fluid and they purify the vaccine from that egg. For a seasonal vaccine, we might get 3 doses of vaccine out of each egg. For H5N1, it doesn't grow as well in those eggs. It tends to either kill them or not grow well at all. And so we might get 1 dose of vaccine out of an egg. And for a seasonal influenza vaccine, it's 15 micrograms is the amount of protein that goes in that vaccine for immunogenicity to protect you.
yep.
H5N1, it takes 90 micrograms, so multitudes more of that protein to be immunogenic. And it takes 2 doses of that vaccine, 3 to 4 weeks apart. So I like to give people the image, since we make these vaccines in eggs, and most of the world does, just for the US, people across America, it would take 900,000 eggs going into the vaccine facility every single day for 9 months.
Mm.
just to make the supply of avian influenza vaccine for the United States. And one of the tricks that we've learned about over the years to stretch that supply is we add an extra chemical component to the vaccine called an adjuvant. When we add that adjuvant, and there's only two producers of that adjuvant in the world, but when we add that adjuvant, we can lower the amount of protein and get more doses out of the supply. So we kind of have that system in place, but it's outdated. This is a 21st century virus and outbreak we're thinking about. That is a 1940s vaccine technology. We've come a long way since then, and it's time to update that arsenal for vaccines. For antiviral drugs, I'll jump real fast. We have really two different classes of antiviral drugs. One works on the neuraminidase, which is surface protein. One works on an internal protein, is a newer drug. The surface protein neuraminidase is called a neuraminidase inhibitor, Tamiflu or also Tamivir. The other one is called zanamivir or Relenza. Both of those drugs have been licensed since about 1999 in the US. What we know about influenza viruses, I described earlier, is they like to change. They like to mutate, they like to shift.
Right.
Have data showing in the presence of these neuraminidase inhibitors. So if a person is treated or an animal is being treated with these drugs, the virus can mutate quite quickly and become resistant to those drugs, meaning we have to have a diversified stockpile of these antiviral drugs that could work. So one would work in case the virus became resistant to the other. The shortcoming we have is most of our stockpile for the also Tamivir or Tamiflu is really old. So we started buying that drug in 2006 and 2007. So I'm concerned if we're in an emergency response and the Strategic National Stockpile starts sending out antiviral drugs that say it expired in 2007 or 2008 on the label, people aren't going to take that drug. They're not going to
Mm.
trust that system. They wouldn't use a COVID test that expired last week. So I doubt
Right.
they're going to use an antiviral drug that said expired 10 years ago. So we have a lot of work to do to refresh our stockpile, diversify our stockpile, and we need new antiviral drugs that work in new ways in case both of those become ineffective.
So to sum up, for right now, for the individual, avoid contact with dead or living wild birds, ducks, geese, etc. Make sure you have pasteurized milk and cook your eggs fully through. And that seems to be most of what we can do at the individual level right now.
At the individual level, yes, and pay attention, stay alert. I mean, if something changes, because things could change quickly, then make sure you're aware of those changes. If suddenly we learn that there's a recall on even pasteurized milk, pay
Right.
attention to that, take it seriously. There are people now thinking it might be cool or trendy to drink raw milk. They have some belief, misinformation, disinformation, that they'll have some protective level if they drink raw milk at this point. No, the answer is no. Avoid raw milk at all costs right now.
All right. We've been speaking with Dr. Rick Bright. Really appreciate your time and your insights today.
Thank you, David. Very much enjoyed being here.